much. I'm so excited to be here. Does your content work? It's a simple question, but it's a powerful question that can make or break your success with content. And it's also not terribly easy to answer. So tonight we're going to delve into the world of content effectiveness and make it easier to answer that question and hopefully help you answer that kind of question with more confidence. But first, let's get to know each other a little bit. So Paula kindly mentioned the book, The Content Advantage. I'm really excited about this new book. I'm really proud of it, most of all because my mom actually read it. This is all the endorsement that you need. And tonight I'm going to share a little bit from the book about content effectiveness. This book also talks about other cool, fun things like content analysis and content strategy and content operations, as well as content effectiveness. So tonight we're going to dial into content effectiveness. Something else important to know about me is that I am a proud dog parent and a Star Wars fan. This is Dottie, our mutt, who here is dressed up like Yoda. She was a very good sport. And I'm really excited to be here tonight. I think if Yoda was here with us tonight, he'd say something like, "Smart you are to care about content effectiveness." So I'd like for us to do a quick little exercise. If you don't mind turning to someone smart-looking sitting near you, which I know will be hard. No, I'm just kidding. Very easy to do. And just share with each other a little self-rating of your knowledge of content effectiveness. Do you consider yourself to be a youngling, kind of new to this? Knight? Maybe you have more experience and knowledge around content effectiveness. Or Jedi Master, someone that I can pick on to help with answering questions in the Q&A. So just take about 30 seconds right now and turn to someone smart looking next to you and do your rating. Share your rating and a little bit about why you gave yourself that rating. All right, let's get back together. And I'd like to get a quick show of hands. If you rated yourself as a youngling, could you raise your hand? Younglings? Any younglings? A few younglings? Yeah, excellent. Several younglings, love it. If you rated yourself as a knight, show of hands. Quite a few knights as well. And if you rated yourself as a master, yes, yes. I like it. Absolutely. Great. So tonight we're going to really move you, if you're a youngling or a knight, closer to a master of content effectiveness. And if you're already a master, then my hope is you'll get some insights, some tidbits, some tips that will help you use content effectiveness faster or easier, or maybe in a new way. So specifically tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about why care about content effectiveness, especially now, and then delve into 6 dimensions of content effectiveness. That is essentially a framework that I've developed over the years based on research, data, experience, just as a way to really be able to talk about, measure, use content effectiveness in a variety of different ways. And then we'll talk a little bit about application. I've got a little extra stuff there, so depending on how time goes, we might cut that a little bit shorter, or we'll be able to cover it all. But we have plenty to delve into here tonight. So let's talk a little bit about why care about content effectiveness and why now. So I'm going to zoom out quite a bit into what business era we're in. So I find it fascinating that we really are in a very different kind of era of business, and this is a framework that I've discovered that I think is useful. I did not develop this, but I think the concept here of we're much more in a relationship-centric era of business than ever is really fascinating. And this is a lot because of digital disruption. And the World Economic Forum has a lot of really cool, interesting studies and facts around how digital is affecting business and really disrupting lots and lots and lots of different types of businesses faster and faster and faster. And that also is driven a lot of times by a more subscription-based model of business. So subscriptions aren't just for, a technology tool anymore. They're for everything from toothbrushes to cars. And that is a very relationship-based kind of model. So a lot of consequences there. So let's talk a little bit about the consequences. I'd like for you to guess an answer to this question just by a show of hands. Since the year 2000, what percentage of the Fortune 500 have disappeared, fallen off the list? If you think the answer is A, 10%, raise your hand. If you think the answer is B, 25%, raise your hand. All right, excellent, quite a few. And if you think the answer is C, 50%. All right. So those of you who guess more, 25, 50% range, definitely on the right track. Since the year 2000, more than half of the Fortune 500 have disappeared. And we're in the midst of all this change, and a lot of us are used to constantly dealing with change in the business world, and if you work in technology, certainly the technology world. So I think it's really interesting to take a moment to step back and really take in just how quickly all of this change is happening and what it's really doing to business. So there are a lot of consequences here for customers, and that leads to the consequences for content. So customers today of these new types of businesses, subscription, very digital, really expect to get the content that they want when they want, how they want, and money is really starting to go into content as well. So certainly it's critical for things like marketing and sales and attracting customers. And this is just one analyst prediction about how much money is going to continue to go into things like content marketing. And content is really critical now to keeping customers, whether it's content that's in the product that they're using, content for support and service, training, education, all kinds of ways that content comes into play to keep that customer relationship going, to deepen that customer relationship, offer other products and services once you have them and you have them engaged for a while. So it might be tempting to think, with all of these needs for content in the customer experience, that means we need a lot of content. And it's tempting to think that the solution to this is a lot of volume in terms of content. And I have found over the years that that isn't really the challenge. Companies, organizations have no problem creating some type of content, creating volume, and the size of the internet, the amount of content available is growing exponentially. I've found that more of the challenge is figuring out how to make content effective. And you don't have to take my word for it. Here are some smart, big management consulting firms saying the same thing. McKinsey has talked about how challenging it is to have a supply chain of sophisticated and interactive content to feed this growing consumer customer demand. Forrester has pointed out things like vast majority of B2B marketers are struggling with coming up with compelling content. Gartner has pointed out challenges around marshaling a diversity of content, diversity, the content you need across that customer relationship for all those different use cases and scenarios. And a lot of times that has to come from a lot of different sources. And then I have seen a lot of this firsthand. So I'm like, yeah, preach it, sisters. The challenge is real. So what I'm sharing in terms of content effectiveness is based on data and research that I'll explain a little bit more in a minute, as well as experience that I've had with all kinds of different companies and organizations. So the challenge is really answering this type of question. Is our content effective for our customers or users? And to make it easier to answer that type of question, we're going to go over dimensions of content effectiveness. But first, I'd like to get your perspective, your intuition of what makes content effective. You care about content even if you're a youngling, and you probably have some inclination as to what makes content effective. So I'd like for you to take like 2 minutes, get together in a pair or a group of 3, and list a few characteristics of effective content in your experience or your opinion. And then we'll get back together and talk about what you came up with. So take 2 minutes to do that, and then we'll get back together. All right, let's get back together. Would anyone be kind enough to share with the larger group a characteristic that you discussed during our little break there? Yes?
Microphone. Oh, microphone. Actually, we had a whole bunch, but one is accessibility and accessibility friendliness.
Absolutely. Accessibility, friendliness. If people can't get to the content, might as well not be there. Really tough for it to be effective. Fantastic. Anyone else care to share with us? Yes?
Contextual.
Ooh, contextual.
Contextual. So a bit of content might be appropriate in one place and not at all appropriate in another.
Absolutely. Yes. Love it. Accessibility and contextual.
Oh, sorry.
How about one more? Anyone care to share with? Oh, here we go.
I'll reiterate it.
Yeah.
Well, because I think she summarized it very nicely at a little bit higher level, is that it fulfills either the business and or the user's goals, whatever those goals might be, whether it's to sell products or learn something or some sort of action, trigger some sort of action.
Absolutely. Love it. Fantastic. So you proved me right. You're very smart, and you have a good sense of what content effectiveness is. So building on that, I want to share these dimensions that can be a useful framework for talking about content effectiveness. So let's dig into that a bit more. I'm going to just give you a quick overview of the 6 dimensions, and then I'll dive a little bit further into many of them. The first is discovery. How do users discover content? Do users find the content that they need? And as part of this, I think about things like accessibility and being able to really access and use the content as key. Accuracy. Do users perceive the content as accurate? That might sound basic, but with our ever increasingly complex experiences, it actually is kind of hard to really maintain that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Polish. Do users or customers perceive the formatting and the design is appropriate for the context or whatever it is that they're trying to do? Relevancy. Do your users perceive the content as serving their needs and interests? So certainly ties into contextual. Usefulness. Does the content anticipate the user's needs and enable them to actually get the goals completed that they need to get completed? And then influence. Do users take action or make a decision after interacting with the content? So that's a quick overview of the 6 dimensions of content effectiveness. Let's dig in a little bit more. Just a little bit of background in terms of some of the data behind the dimensions. The dimensions came out of a study that I did of content and credibility many years ago. Based on some of the findings from that, developed a tool to collect more data about content and its impact on people. That tool is ContentWorks, and I've used it with lots of different situations, lots of different types of websites especially, and accumulated a lot of data. So took that data, put it together, sliced and diced it, did some exploratory analysis to see if this kind of framework really holds up, and then also see if we could learn anything more about the way these dimensions of content effectiveness really come into play. So I learned some cool stuff. I wanted to share some of that with you. And I think it will be useful, even if some of this sounds basic or intuitive. There are new ways that having these basics in place are really coming to light. So we can't ever forget some of these basics. So discovery, findability. As I mentioned earlier, of course, if you can't find the content, if you can't access the content, might as well not be there. That's super clear. But what we learned in looking at our data is that when people have a bad experience with content, and not only affects getting to the content, but it affects the rest of the experience and interaction with the content. So you could have the best content in the world that meets all the other criteria for effectiveness, but if people have a negative experience trying to get to or find the content and eventually find it, it really distorts their view of the content. This is just a little bit more data showing the difference between how people perceived, the same content if they had a difficult time getting to it or finding it versus if they didn't perceive difficulty getting to it or finding it. So really don't have much of a chance to make a second impression when it comes to content. It isn't necessarily fair, but it is absolutely the case. It's much more of an effect than I ever would have thought. This really surprised me. I also actually experienced this not long ago. I guess about a year and a half ago or so, launched a little online academy called Content Science Academy. Long story short, some of the first people using it had difficulty accessing the courses. It was a frustrating experience. And I fully expected to get, feedback about that and was prepared to, handle and fix that. What I wasn't prepared for was, the people who had a tough time accessing the material also complained about the material, even though it was based on material that had worked really well in, workshops and other kinds of little online webinars, and is proven material. The content was solid. So I got a taste of my own medicine there. Fortunately, I was able to fix the issues with the academy, but that was a really strong reminder of the whole experience has to be really tight, or else it really will affect the way people view the content. So let's take a moment and talk about what are some ways to make finding your content a great experience. So why don't you take just a minute with the group or the trio that you've been chatting with, and talk about some of the ways that you've either tried and seen work, or that you would like to try and see work to make finding your content, your company's content, your client's content a better or great experience. So take about a minute or so to do that, and we'll get back together. All right. Would someone be kind enough to share one of the ways that you discussed in your group with the larger group? Yeah. Taxonomies. Ooh.
Oh, taxonomies.
Taxonomies. Oh, I'm going to ask her a quick follow-up. Tell us a little bit about how that comes into play.
Well, I think it's something that always gets forgotten, and it's probably the most foundational thing you can do, especially if you have lots and lots of content. If you don't have a clear way to categorize and organize your content that everyone agrees to and you adhere to, it's just always going to be chaotic, and no amount of good navigation or content strategy is going to fix that if you don't have good foundational taxonomy.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. Fantastic. Anyone else? Yeah.
I think you have to meet users where they are. Sometimes people are typing fast, they're making mistakes, and so offering suggestions and not kicking them off if they spelled something wrong, but saying, did you mean something like that? Because that can keep them on the site for longer, and searching for more options can help.
Ooh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Helping them get back on the right track when they start to get off track and be proactive about it.
It's a poor experience when you get no results, even though you know there are results there. It's just that there's a typo and you know, frustrated.
Definitely. Great. How about one more example of a way to make finding content a great experience, or at least better? I heard lots of excellent discussion, so I know there's another one out there.
Well, I would say not misrepresenting content. So,
ooh,
like a
what do you mean by
clickbait
that?
headline.
Oh, yes.
And you go there and you're like, this is not what I wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fantastic. Let's not trick people into finding content they didn't really want or need. Great. All right. So I'm really excited about personalization in terms of a way to help with this whole findability challenge, and also excited about just some different ways that I've seen. So I'm going to share a couple of examples with you. There are lots and lots of different ways to make finding content a great experience, or at least a better experience. And I don't think we can rely, to your point, entirely on main navigation. Search has its challenges. So when we can kind of proactively bring content to customers or help them, with a little bit different way of getting to the content that they need, I think that is really exciting. And a lot of it, to your point as well, depends on things like having good basics around taxonomy in place so that we can more proactively deliver the right content with the right logic. So this is a little example that I like a lot. It's a little wizard on a website for a company called Ellucian. And Ellucian is ginormous. They have a lot of offerings. They basically have been in higher education for a long time, serve every type of higher education institution. And so it's really tough to figure out how do we connect the right people with the right stuff, especially if they are new or prospective types of customers. So this is just a little kind of simple variation on the wizard, instead of like the step-by-step window after window after window. This is more dynamic and interactive, and you just stay on that one page and screen, and it's very quick and easy. But you can drill down a little bit more, and it's easier than trying to do a search and then filter the search results, and it's been something that's worked really well. So this is a little evolution of some of the different ways that we've looked for and tried to browse or navigate or get to content in the past that I like. And then just wanted to call out, again, as something a little bit different, and certainly more and more current, mobile notifications. So things like email in the past have been a great way to help connect people with new content, the latest content that's more tailored for them because you know a little bit more about them. And mobile notifications are becoming more and more like that. So I've seen presentations by publishers like Goop, which G-Spotting is owned by Goop. That's the example on the right there, where they've had so much success with their mobile apps that are relatively simple, but they have mobile notifications, and their audiences let them, notify them on mobile. Just tremendous success with connecting people with the right content and keeping them engaged. So much success that, Goop talked about pivoting to being more primarily on mobile. And it's just an exciting space, not just for products, but also media and other kinds of content-driven experiences. And then on the left here is an example from a company called ShareCare, which essentially works with a lot of large employers, health insurance companies, and provides almost like a Fitbit type experience, but a little bit more broad in terms of covering lots of different aspects of tracking your health and wellness. And so notifications are really successful for them in keeping people on track, letting them know what's going on, getting them engaged with content that's super highly tailored for them. So just a couple of many ways to think about making content and finding it a better experience as things get more complicated and exciting with digital. So let's talk a little bit about accuracy and polish, these other two dimensions. I'm going to focus a little bit more on accuracy just for time, but we found some interesting things around accuracy and the role that plays in content effectiveness. So there's a connection between perceiving content as accurate and perceiving content as relevant and useful. So we found that in the data we had, people who perceive content as accurate are more than twice as likely to report that they achieved what they wanted to achieve, and 5 times more likely to report accomplishing goals than, of course, people who said, this content isn't accurate, or I'm not sure whether it's accurate. And this also affected people's overall perceptions of how effective the content was. So just a little bit more breakdown of that. So let's look at an example here. This is essentially classified. It's an article, kind of a long classified about bumblebee Camaros. And I'm going to test your eyesight a little bit here. Can anyone tell what date this was published? Yeah. Does anyone see any interesting references in the opening line of the article? Transformers, yeah. Have you seen a Transformer movie lately? So this was published in 2011. This is still on the AutoTrader website. Any potential problems with that? What challenges, issues do you see for the user or for AutoTrader with the fact this is still on their website? Yes?
That could affect their SEO rankings. Old content is a negative ranking factor for SEO.
It could affect their SEO rankings because old content is a factor in SEO. I love it. Yes?
Wow, surprised I caught that. It could affect their believability. So if somebody saw this, it'd kind of make you wonder how accurate any of the cars are on the website.
Absolutely, yeah. Definitely undermines the credibility of AutoTrader and the other content. Any other issues, problems, challenges that come to mind?
Makes you wonder about the actual product. Has it been on sale for 8 years?
I know. What if you really were into Bumblebee Camaros and you thought for a moment that there was one available that was owned by a celebrity and you got excited and then realized that it's probably not for sale anymore. So, yeah, and interestingly, the reason, well, actually, let me ask this as a question. Can you guess why AutoTrader has kept this article? Any theories, hypotheses about why AutoTrader has kept this article up? Yes?
I was hypothesizing that maybe they reanimated it, Content Zombie, when the more recent Bumblebee movie did come out. Maybe they pulled it out of the archives because it might be applicable.
Oh, wow. You are giving them a lot of credit. that is an excellent
Too
theory.
rosy, perhaps.
Yeah, I like it, though. It's very positive. Also like Content Zombie. That's awesome. Yes.
They might have a nightmare. Their CMS might be a nightmare, and it might actually be an updated post that is getting date stamped in a wacky way.
Their
I've seen that
CMS
happen
might be a
recently.
nightmare, and there might be an issue with the date stamping. Yep, that is definitely possible. Auto Trader's a large company and part of an even larger company, for sure. Absolutely, yeah.
They don't know it's there. Or,
That's also very possible.
or all they're looking at is traffic, like, oh, we're getting lots of hits on this, so that means it's valuable content.
Ooh, tell me more about that.
I don't
So you think that they might
Well,
think they have to keep it up?
Well,
because it's getting tracked?
sometimes people look at content effectiveness from one lens only, like traffic. And so maybe lots of people are searching for this, I don't know. And they're like, oh, that means it's good content. And then they just leave it up because it's good.
Yes. That is the reason why Alexa stayed up. Exactly. And I've seen examples of the other items as well, so those are very on point. And I was told it was a combination of that and SEO. So some outdated thinking on SEO that had to keep this content so that that long-standing authority is there. I didn't fully understand the rationale, but it was very outdated. So the term bumblebee chimeras is a popular term, gets a lot of traffic. That's why this is getting a lot of traffic. So what would be perhaps a better solution to seeing that opportunity than just keeping the same classified up for 8 years, 9 years, 8 years?
Put up new content.
Yeah, maybe about bumblebee chimeras, yeah.
And their lasting interest,
Yes,
the craze.
there's all kinds of things you could write about bumblebee chimeras. Yeah, absolutely. So, excellent. So, my point there is even though accuracy might seem like a basic, it comes up again and again in all kinds of different ways and interesting conversations, and you never know when you'll have to make a case or an argument for making sure the content actually is accurate and also making sure that customers perceive it as accurate. And so something else that I see a lot is cues like multiple dates or multiple brands and people who are potential authors and things like that that can confuse people as to the source or when it was published or, you know, those kinds of cues around its accuracy. So this is definitely a basic we cannot lose. Now let's talk a little bit about relevance and usefulness. So something that we discovered is that you really have to have both. Content that is useful and not relevant isn't really going to do a lot for you. Content that is relevant but not useful isn't going to do a lot for you. They're not the same thing. They're very related, but they're not exactly the same. So this is just a little bit of a breakdown in terms of how they come into play with how people perceive the effectiveness of content. And we took a little bit deeper dive with usefulness and relevance just to see if there's anything that we could glean in terms of, you know, when content isn't useful or isn't relevant, are there some trends, are there some common themes as to why that is? And we dug a little bit and found evidence to support things like not having enough detail or not having enough sophistication, like not being advanced enough if your customers or users are pretty advanced. That definitely plays a part. And content that isn't or isn't clearly, tailored to the specific type of user or person or the particular use case or scenario, that comes into play as well. So before I share a few little examples of content usefulness and relevance that I think are interesting and good, I'd like for you to get back into your groups quickly. Pick one of these questions, a technique to ensure content actually is useful and relevant, or a technique to help customers perceive, help them be clear about why the content should be useful and relevant to them. Either one of those questions. Take about a minute, 2 minutes, and get back. Yeah.
Define the difference between useful and relevant.
Yeah, so useful is the content, say, covers a topic in an approach format that is helpful, it seems scannable, and like it has, good directions or helpful information. But when you dig into it, it's actually kind of intended, it seems like it's intended for someone else. It's too basic, it's not advanced enough, or it doesn't really fit your situation. So useful is, it really is seems to be meeting a goal, seems to be meeting a need. Relevant is, it's actually really contextual specific to you, your situation, or at least it seems that way. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? It's a roundabout way of saying that. So I'll give you 1 to 2 minutes to dig into one of these questions, and then we'll get back together. For those of you who chose question A, would any of you be kind enough to share a technique that you discussed? Anyone? Yes, in the back.
We talked about bringing actual users into a lab and giving them a set of instructions for a scenario that we wanted to have them complete, and then seeing if they were able to do that without friction by following the content through like a prototype, or and then asking them for feedback afterwards as to what was challenging in that process. Where were they having trouble completing it?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually getting that qualitative feedback, talking to customers directly, that is the ideal way to ensure content is useful and relevant. Absolutely. Yes, another technique.
We talked about search on a site. So, search is sometimes the last resort. You're like, I can't find the thing I want. I'm going to search for it. And then you search in the box provided on the company's website, and then you get those like search provided by Google kind of thing, and it has like ad sponsored content, it has like Google branding on it, and you're like, wait, did I just get transported off the site? Like, is this for this site? And there's a bunch of stuff, and it's usually, that makes me perceive it as not useful and relevant.
Right, yeah.
Even though it might be. You're just like,
it's not clear.
Where am I?
Yeah.
Is this relevant to me at all? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Great example of what we want to avoid, for sure. All right, how about anyone who answered, did anyone answer question B, talk about question B? If you did, would you be kind enough to share a technique or two that you discussed?
We kind of looked at it from like the psychological perception thing, and thinking about like Robert Cialdini and the influence, the psychology of persuasion, and
That's
just how to take that hack human behavior and not twist, but contextualize things so they're perceived as more authoritative or relevant or accurate or whatever.
Yeah. What would be, did you all talk about specific example, or not that you had to, but
We were kind of
I think having a comment section is a way to get the social behavior, confirming your prejudgment. If you see other people appreciating the content or finding it useful, you might engage with it because you recognize yourself in the other people using the site. So you could relate to people in the comments, feedback, forum, sort of social piece of the content, around the content.
Yep. That is called identification. And yeah, if people like me are finding this useful and relevant, then I probably should too. Absolutely. Great. Yes, one more.
So we talked about just cues that you have on the page, that the content, because the perception is it fresh? Is it new? Kind of, we all keyed in on the 2011 for the Bumblebee article.
Right.
And so like having a date timestamp, and you kind of have to do an audit to make sure things are updated regularly.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
just having cues, and then also, what's when they didn't perceive it as useful and relevant, why? Your couple slides before, and it was because it was too vague in general, or less often more too specific. And so if you can have some way to, do progressive disclosure, so you start general and then you go specific, or else maybe at the top you could have, this is for a beginner. If you're an expert, go here. This is for an expert. If you're a beginner, go here. So just giving the user options.
Yeah.
So that they can go where they feel they need to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Love it. You guys are so smart. So I'm going to share a couple of examples, and then we'll talk a little bit about application, and we'll finish up. You guys have been fantastic sports. I really appreciate it. So in general, something that I've found helpful that applies in a few different ways is the rule of thumb: the more specific, often the more terrific. So this is Think Money. It's a magazine that TD Ameritrade publishes for active investors. They're very specific about their audience. This isn't necessarily for all of their customers. This is for active investors, which tend to be more sophisticated, more into trading. And because they've gotten specific about who the audience is, they actually say in the magazine and on the website who it's for. They flesh out content that really is geared for these type of people. They've seen a lot of success with this magazine, influencing things like repeat trades, multiple trades, which for them is repeat business. Another variation of this, which you called out, is actually being super specific about the audience, whether it's the level of detail, level of sophistication. This is from the Home Depot, and they have a huge set of do-it-yourself guides that have been really, really successful for them on a lot of different points, including just moving people through the research and project and buying process. And they call out things like difficulty level, just to help people gauge very quickly whether a project would be really in their kind of wheelhouse. And then another example, when I was at MailChimp, we had a lot of challenges with small business. That was the customer for MailChimp, and small business, that as a market is actually huge, hugely diverse, all kinds of small businesses. It's crazy, it's insane. But MailChimp realized that e-commerce, the e-commerce small and growing business, was a really important type of customer, really important segment. And so MailChimp developed newsletter, which is also content publicly available on the the site really focused on the e-commerce customer. And this has been hugely successful. Everything that the newsletter talks about is really framed in terms that e-commerce businesses would understand. It's really focused on their kinds of needs and pain points and not other kinds of businesses that MailChimp serves. And this was really valuable to attracting more of those types of customers, as well as helping these types of customers adopt more of MailChimp's growing and growing and growing set of features. So a few examples of usefulness and relevance and how really thinking about being specific not only in your planning and what you do, like user research, customer research, to figure out your approach to content, but also in actually saying it, being explicit about it in the content itself. All right, so I'm just gonna highlight a few things about applying this framework of content effectiveness. We've walked through, different techniques and examples of where these elements come into play and reiterated how important thinking through these different dimensions of content effectiveness are. But I wanted to highlight at a little bit different level what I hope the value of this framework will be. As Yoda said, do or do not, there is no try. I would hate for this just to be a nice idea that isn't really helpful or useful to you or your teams moving forward. So a couple of thoughts on using this further. So this is a simple, high-level approach to content that I have found time and time again is useful. Content's never really done, so I see it as more of a cycle than a linear process. And a content effort begins with some kind of analysis, ideally, and then goes into some kind of strategy or planning, and then it's implemented, and then ideally we go back into analysis. And so analysis is where I see this framework being really helpful, and just wanted to highlight a few scenarios. With analysis up front before you're getting into strategy, I found this framework to be helpful for things like doing a qualitative audit of the content, having you or other content experts or people who care about content take a look at the content and get a sense of how effective it is, framework to break that down and report on what you find. Also helpful for quantitative. So some of what we pulled in terms of the data, you can ask your customers about their perceptions of content and get some data to kind of back up what you're seeing from a qualitative perspective. So this is an example of where I did this for a company in the credit monitoring space. And this is an overview of all the kind of analysis work that we did, but we looked at the content qualitatively and also looked at the content effectiveness from a quantitative perspective. And so just a couple little examples here. From a qualitative perspective and just reviewing the content ourselves, we noticed that links to a free annual credit report were kind of buried in the experience, and thought maybe that would be tough for people to find, but we got a lot of validation that really bothered people when we collected input on what they thought about, what customers thought about the content effectiveness. So one quote was, "It seems like they're more interested in selling their products than in consumer protection." And we also crunched numbers a bit further because we did collect that data, and we were able to say, you know what, consumers are 4 times more likely to view you less favorably after interacting with your content. That's pretty much the opposite of what you want. So this is really helpful in getting support for a very different approach to content, and really helped with driving a strategy that was much more consumer friendly. So the second big scenario for content effectiveness is after you implement content strategy, looking at how well it's working, and also helping to stay the course, especially for the things that are working well. Govern, the approach so that you really preserve that strategy. So content effectiveness can help with fleshing out guides, templates, or tips as you involve more and more people in content, especially if you're a big kind of organization, and can also help with framing up the kind of reporting you might want to do that informs what I call content intelligence. Basically, all the good stuff you can learn from tracking and measuring what's going on with your content. So I have a lot of data to support that evaluating content effectiveness is important to content team success and to scaling content efforts. And I think companies, as they do more and more with content, will be faced more and more with the challenge of scaling their content approach and operations and all that good stuff. So I won't go into all the details here, but when we asked teams and team leaders in the content space about the challenges they were facing, evaluating content effectiveness came up in a few different forms, quite a lot. At the same time, we did get some feedback from content professionals, team leaders, team members who reported a lot of success, and asked them about what was involved in that, just to learn success factors and evaluating the impact of their content, evaluating their success was really key, but not very many content professionals and content teams are actually doing it. So we have evidence that evaluating content impact, effectiveness, success is really important to being successful overall as a content team and to growing and scaling and all of that. Yet, not a lot of people are actually doing it. So my hope is that this helps make it a little bit easier to do it so that we can all be much more successful. So how do you actually do that? That's a whole another conversation. We could talk for hours about that, but I just wanted to share a few little quick tips. Really starts with trying to make content effectiveness part of what you, your clients, your companies measure. Measure about content specifically, or measure overall. And it's easier to do this. It takes a little time and effort up front to think it through, look at what data and tools you have, and figure out how you can bring it together. But it's worth it now, because it really is possible to have much easier reporting and much more robust reporting about anything, including content. So let's close with this quick last activity. We'll get back together and give away some goodies. All right, so take just a minute or two and share what kinds of barriers you might be experiencing or have experienced in the past when it comes to evaluating content in any way, especially content effectiveness. And if you have time, if you have seen a good way to overcome the challenge or barrier, also discuss that a little bit. If you have not seen a good way to overcome it, that is okay. You're not alone. About 70% are in the same boat. All right, I'll give you 2 minutes and then we'll get back together. Would anyone be kind enough to share a barrier challenge you've experienced?
So we have 4.
Oh yeah, I like
But
it.
they're really quick. So number 1 is your content is such a mess you don't even know where to start, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I can't. The second is convincing others of the importance to measure. Number 3 is like having the right mindset about. So I give an example. I worked for a company where we had a small team producing external content and a large team producing internal content. We measured the external, but we never had anything to measure the internal. And we were costing ourselves money because our employees, our engineers, couldn't find what the other engineers were doing. And so it was,
Absolutely,
but the
yeah.
whole focus was on the customer. And it was so much on the customer that we forgot to take care of ourselves.
Ooh, yeah.
And
inevitably that will affect the customer down the road, but it's
Right.
hard to realize that.
And I didn't write down number 4 and I forgot, so.
Number 4.
That's okay.
All right. Those are 3 awesome ones, so thank you very much. All right. How about anyone else care to share a different challenge or barrier that you discussed? Yeah.
So in our organization, we do a lot of A/B tests, where oftentimes we change the design and the content at the same time. So when we measure success, it's really hard to understand if it's the content that worked or the design was amazing, and it's a tricky thing for the designers as well, because we often we don't always have the time to. I guess that would be a potential way to solve it, is to test things a little differently, but not all projects have that kind of a time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It sometimes the people who are running the optimization testing don't get some of those nuances and differences. They're not necessarily the designer or the content strategist or copywriter, whoever's involved. And I can absolutely see that happening quite a bit. And so I love having content folks involved in thinking about, all kinds of different content testing, having a little backlog of, content experiments that you could throw up. You don't have to necessarily do them all, but, I find as you're working on projects, you might come up with an idea for an experiment, throw it in the backlog, comb through it and prioritize, and, you might not get to everything, but at least you don't miss out on good ideas. So that's a great one. Yeah, absolutely, makes a lot of sense. How about one more? Anyone else care to share a different challenge? Yes.
We have.
Woo. Nice catch.
Thanks. Nice throw. We have a lot of data about from our customers and about the pages they go to and what they think of the content on those pages. What we don't have is data about what the consequence would be, the impact would be to fix that. And we don't have the resources to actually act on all the data that we have from customers.
Yeah. So there isn't really time and space to take that great data that you're getting and sort through it, make sense of it, figure out how to get some insights and decide what you're going to do about it. Yeah,
It's kind
absolutely.
of like they don't find it useful, so what?
What do we do now?
How do you create a strategy for showing the DSI of
bad content mapped to specific use cases, I think is our struggle right now.
Yeah, and that takes a little bit of exploration and digging and carving out some space to, in the process to be able to do it. So that example I showed earlier of the credit monitoring company where we collected that different data and we sliced and diced it and found some immediate consequence to that big issue they were having with burying the content that people really wanted. So it's tough to do that if you don't have a step in the process or a regular way of taking a look at this data and being able to really make sense of it. I heard a good quote from, I believe it was the book Atomic Habits recently, that was, we don't rise up to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have a system that helps us make it easier, more automatic to evaluate content, it's really tough to do. So yes, that's a very excellent example of a barrier or challenge. It's exciting we've gotten to the point, though, that we've got the data. That's progress. All right. So I'm doing what I can to help with overcoming these barriers. Feel free to use me as a scapegoat. We've got research published on a little magazine called Content Science Review, as well as other publications that really put out there to help with making it a little bit easier to make the case for even starting to evaluate content in some way. And my hope is that we can move from kind of this old world of no data or just a very limited kind of view of data to a more sophisticated world where we can really take the data, the feedback, the insights, and use them in really great content decisions, ongoing content planning, and really, other kinds of decisions that a company faces, product ideas, marketing ideas, all kinds of stuff that we can learn as we see how people interact with our content. So thank you so much for letting me share some of what I've learned tonight. And we wanted to do a quick little giveaway and answer some questions. So the first person to ask a question oh yeah, we'll get a book. We've got another to give away as well. Yes.
On one of your slides, you had something about they were 4 times more likely to view the client negatively or something like that.
Yeah.
I would just love to know how you got that insight. Like, did you do a survey, or how did you get something like that perception?
Yes. So we did an evaluation where we did essentially a survey. It's protocol that I developed and refined and validated, and used that protocol or set of questions, and at the same time collected the analytics from people who are answering the survey, so we could really match up what people say, what they reported, and what they did. And then we had a lot of data that we could then slice and dice to really definitively show, hey, when people did this with the content, here's what the consequence was, or here's the impact on their perception of the content. So that's how we did it.
Was that a tool that helped you match up survey with analytics, or?
Yeah, a tool called ContentWorks, which I have been involved in developing, full disclosure. But there are also other ways that you could potentially do it, but just try and make it easy to do in the tool. And you could also get a lot of great feedback from like interviews and other ways of interacting with customers. What I like about having the larger set of data, a little bit more quantitative data, is because so many companies and organizations are trying to be data-driven or data-informed, just adds a lot of validation to what a customer might tell you in an interview.
Awesome.
And it's also quick, you know, pretty fast.
That's great. Thank you.
So here's your book. All right. So any other questions before we do the last book giveaway? Yes.
How do you define content?
I define content as the substance of a customer or user experience. It's the text, video, audio, documents, really what makes up a digital experience as well as lots of other types of customer experiences. Is that helpful? It's everything now.